Mustafa Kemal needed unconditional support from everyone. He had to act fast and act without being questioned. Taking advantage of the Greeks' proximity to Ankara, he convinced the parliament to grant him extraordinary powers. Referred to as the Supreme Commander, he went about organizing and equipping the Turkish army with unprecedented energy and ruthlessness. I had to interest the Turkish nation in the war in all their actions, their sentiments, and their conceptions. Every single individual in the village, in his home, in the fields, had to consider himself in the same way as those fighting at the front.
He not only could fight the army and command it, but he had to build it. And he had to get some acceptance from the Turkish people, and he had to generate resources, and he had to design equipment, and he had to train the entire organization from scratch. That's really, in my judgment, a tremendous accomplishment.
Following Mustafa Kemal, every Turk rallied his last for him and for their independence. After the Greek armies advanced to within 51 kilometers of Ankara, everything rested in the fight that would take place on the banks of the river Sakarya. Mustafa Kemal was there to personally command his troops. You will no longer have a line of defense, but you will have a surface of defense. Retiring groups will halt when they can, but the whole line will not retire to form a new front. All of Turkey shall be our surface of defense. He also promised execution to anyone who retreated without his specific orders. Under Mustafa Kemal's leadership, Turks were ready to make their stand. After 22 days and nights of fierce fighting, the Greek advance had finally been stopped.
The stand was so successful that not only did the Greeks pull back from the Sakarya, but they never again tried to reach the Sakarya. Instead, they fell back in disorder and never again were a serious threat to the national movement.
Mustafa Kemal was given the title of Marshal by the parliament. His reputation not only spread within the country, but also in the east, among the colonies of the British Empire. Within 2 years of his arrival in Anatolia, Mustafa Kemal was able to open a parliament, recapture Turkish territories in the east and the south, break the unity of the Allies, and isolate the Greeks. He felt stronger and more confident than ever. What remained was the last blow against the Greeks and their British sponsors. The rebel was about to become the savior he had always dreamed of. As Mustafa Kemal prepared for his decisive attack against the Greeks, his life, as well as the city of Ankara, were changing. The newly formed Soviet Union had opened an embassy in the city, while many other government buildings were also being erected. Fikriye, with her unshakable devotion for Mustafa Kemal, made a warm home life for him, while many people joined him nightly to discuss his plans for the future of the country. Once, after dinner, when Fikriye asked him about marriage, he replied, "I am married to the Turkish nation." After a year of careful planning and total secrecy, Mustafa Kemal decided that the morning of August the 26th would be the day of judgment. Surprising his commanders, he decided to attack the Greeks at their strong point of Afyon, described as impregnable by British engineers. Gathering his troops in secret and devising some false maneuvers to mislead the enemy, he prepared for battle. On the morning of August the 26th, viewing the front from Kocatepe Hill, he ordered the attack. Victory was immediate. With a swift, ferocious attack by the Turkish army, the Greeks were taken by total surprise. Within 3 days, the Greek commanders had been captured, and the Turkish troops were on their way to liberate Izmir, where the Greeks had landed 3 years before. Leading his troops and exuding a wave of energy and confidence, Mustafa Kemal, by August the 31st, had erased the Greeks' mega idea, which had envisioned the re-establishment of the Byzantine Empire. In relentless pursuit of the retreating Greek army, Turkish troops entered Izmir on September the 9th, 1922.
After the re-entry of Turkish troops into Izmir, Lloyd George fell from power, and politically the British establishment had started revising its plans for the Near East, returning to the traditional idea that Turkey, and not Greece, was the strong regional power. In Greece, of course, a disaster, a revolution. The generals and the prime minister shot, eventually the fall of the monarchy.
Acknowledged as the savior, Mustafa Kemal was the most powerful, most revered man in the country. He was offered the positions of Sultan and Caliph to sit at the throne of the Ottoman dynasty. But he had other plans in mind. Mustafa Kemal had already decided to abolish the Sultanate the first chance he got. Again, the Allies would provide the opportunity.
They invited both the Sultan's government in Istanbul and the Turkish nationalist government in Ankara to send a joint delegation to Lausanne to renegotiate the treaty. Well, after having defeated everybody, Mustafa Kemal was not going to share the government of Turkey with the government in Istanbul that had cooperated with the Allies.
Taking advantage of the situation, Mustafa Kemal explained to the delegates that the only government which represented the people and acted on their will was the Ankara government. Not wanting to hurt the religious sentiments of the deputies, he proposed to separate the Sultanate from the Caliphate and abolish the former. Heated arguments broke out. At one point, the discussions became so intense as to force Mustafa Kemal to remark, "If the proposition is not accepted, some heads will be cut off." It was sufficient. The Sultanate was abolished. Ending the anomaly of two governments, Mustafa Kemal turned his eyes to the Lausanne Peace Conference, where his newly appointed foreign minister, İsmet, represented the nationalists. Acting on strict orders from Mustafa Kemal himself, İsmet made it clear to the Allies that they were dealing with a new government, which demanded equality and respect. After months of deliberation, the Turkish delegation was able to gain Turkey's complete independence in political, economic, and military matters. The country's borders, with only slight modifications, were those that Mustafa Kemal had presented in 1907 and later named in the National Pact. With this breathtaking pace of diplomacy and politics, Mustafa Kemal's personal life was in considerable confusion. Leaving Fikriye